Explore Pathfinder Savage Worlds and D&D. Fantasy Grounds VTT. Try it for a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Fantasy Grounds VTT.
Hello and well met. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. So today I'm going to be talking about Harpies. So did a little research before doing this and decided that I would like to share some of this knowledge with you. And also so that you can kind of get used to using Fantasy Grounds, because that's what we're doing. You know, a lot of tutorials and stuff I've done kind of have already everything done. And what I'm doing is kind of going back and kind of getting down to the meat and potatoes, because I think a lot of people know kind of what to do somewhat in Fantasy Grounds, but they don't know how to get there. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm doing this. So I think that a lot of people don't really get to that point, or they don't have time. So that's kind of what this is. So hopefully this will help you a little bit. And this will also lead into better adventures down the road for you. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is taking a look at the Harpy. So I think they're one of the creepier creatures out there when it comes to D&D, fantasy type, ancient folklore. I think this was in Greek mythology as well. So the Harpies were, they would attack you from the cliff sides, and they would allure people with their song, and it was kind of based off of folklore, but it kind of made its way into our games. So this is kind of to do with that. So I have a standard stat block for the NPC Harpy, and it's not bad. Like, when you just straight out of the box, I mean, you have a multi-attack. You get 2 attacks. You get one with its claws, and that's plural, so it's probably 2 claws. And then one with its club. So you can interpret that how you'd like, because it's only 2 attacks. So it might just be 1 claw and 1 club, because that wouldn't make sense. And then what happens is they have a alluring song that essentially charms you, and you have to make a DC 11 saving throw. And then if you're charmed, you're basically incapacitated, and you'll ignore all the rest of the Harpies. And if it's more than 5 feet away, the target has to move towards the Harpy on the most direct route. So it's not going to... it can't avoid attacks of opportunity. And it can make saves if it's going to be, you know, going to jump over a cliff, or, you know, jump into a lava pit. But essentially, it's kind of a really powerful charm type thing. And then if you have the SRD, this is the artwork that Doug had put in here. It looks pretty sharp. I like it. I got my own, which I've done using a generative AI tool, but this would work. I mean, this is fine. But I want to go into the custom stat block that I had made, and this kind of is a little bit more in depth, and it has a couple more things. So this would be like a custom version of it, except for this has the ambusher trait, which is something that I added for more like a martial type Harpy. So this would be something that you could add to kind of make your game a little bit different, because you got a lot of people out there that actually memorize stat blocks. You got people that know that this particular Harpy has an 11 armor class and 38 hit points to start with. So you can change that up a little bit when you use your own content. So I can actually go in and edit, add a couple less hit points. I can change the stats around a little bit. You can add or take away different functions. It just depends on what you're doing. On the notes tab here, I got some notes here for tactics, which I think is important, because there are lots of considerations that go into this type of encounter. And then on top of that, I found a map and all kinds of cool stuff. So We're going to start with the NPC stat block, some of the lore, some of the things that you may want to know or to research. So there isn't a ton of information about Harpies on the back of the stat block, but if you do your own research, you can come up with quite a few bits of information. So I took some content out of the Monsters Know What They're Doing website, and that was basically a really well-designed book if you haven't ever checked that out. But I looked up Harpies, essentially. So I included that resource, and I quoted that in this information. So in my notes up here, this is all the information that I got from this particular lore, was all of these tactics. So there's some really cool stuff. So in the background section, I partially wrote and then I borrowed some stuff that I had found online. But basically, for group dynamics, the Harpy ambushers are often found in groups of at least 2 or 3, but may gather up to 5 when food sources are plentiful. So if there's enough stuff in the area to support them, there'll be up to 5 of them at the most. They cooperate to defend their territory, but will engage in aggressive interactions with each other over disputes. So they do fight each other. Their territorial behavior, basically, they're very territorial and vicious, attacking any intruders with coordinated attacks to push them into hazards or separate them from larger groups. So they're pretty sneaky. The survival instincts are based on the fact that these Harpy ambushers retreat when a fight turns against them. It prioritizes their survival in this case, and they are quick to flee if they sustain like at least half their hit points. So that demonstrates their ability to survive. You know, they don't want to die, essentially. So they're really fiercely territorial. They vigorously defend chosen areas against intruders, including other Harpies. Disputes over territory or food sources can quickly escalate into violent confrontations among them. Despite their viciousness towards one another, they prioritize external threats that could jeopardize their collective security. So they do have a hierarchy. So when they engage, upon detecting an intrusion, Harpies coordinate their attacks to overwhelm and disorient their targets. Their initial tactic remains swooping attacks. They just kind of go down and they try to push you into environmental hazards, such as like into water or something like that. They try to isolate the weaker individuals, and then in larger groups, one Harpy will shove into dangerous positions, and then others will use their multi-attacks to inflict damage. So if there's more than one, they'll usually tag team. During combat, Harpies communicate with screeches and tactical positioning, attempting to encircle and confine their prey. This coordination is especially evident when dealing with stronger or more numerous foes. If the Harpies perceive a threat as too great or sustain significant injuries, they will not hesitate to retreat, regroup, or even abandon the territory if it proves too costly to defend it. So they're not gonna sacrifice themselves for everything. Above all, Harpies exhibit a strong survival instinct. They are quick to flee from losing battles, ensuring that their numbers remain sufficient to defend their territory or to live to fight another day. This instinctual caution in the face of overwhelming odds highlights their pragmatic approach to survival and territorial control. And then they give some details about the appearance. So they're kind of rugged, scruffy looking, kind of like aggressive. They have kind of ugly feathers, kind of like vultures. They're mottled skin. They have like a bristled kind of appearance. They're kind of aggressive looking. They got talons. They're really sharp, very predatory, and they have piercing eyes. So they're just kind of really creepy. So anyways, I was doing some research on these guys and girls, but they're pretty vicious. So there are male Harpies, but they're not as prevalent. I think they're a little bit more rare. And then I also made some stat blocks for a spellcasting variant, which is more like a shamanic version. And it's just a few innate spells. It's not really a spellcaster per se, but it's one that's in tune with nature. It's kind of like a hybrid between a druid and a cleric and like a storm sorcery. So they kind of have a couple spells from each one of those. Elemental, kind of nature that has to do with birds and avians. They can speak Oron. And then they kind of have like I think they have like fog cloud or something like that, but they don't have a ton of spells. They're just essentially like a utility spellcaster. And then there's just all kinds of really cool things to consider if you're going to run one of these types of encounters. So when I was researching, I got to thinking about like how they might, you know, how they just might operate like when you encounter them. So it's just kind of a very in-depth exploration as to what they can do. So I have like a Harpy stat block for like the young, and then I have one for like the spellcaster, and then I have all the other things. So this is just kind of a preliminary work that I had done, and then I got to thinking about, you know, what sort of things might happen when they get in a fight and that kind of thing. So I looked at some things that might come into play. So one of the things is the maneuverability. Now that's not really a thing for 5th edition, but I did consider like how do they fly? What does that look like? How does that play out in battle? So a lot of times that came down to sort of a middle of the road maneuverability class. If you guys remember the 1st edition D&D, they had the diagram A through E. Basically, it's how quick they can dive and bank. So they can, like, some of them can do a hairpin turn. Some of them have to take a really wide turn, like dragons. I think their maneuverability class is like a D or a B or something like that. But the way they described it was they can dive really well. They can take corners okay, like not bad, because they have to dive down in between cliffs and stuff. So they do have a little bit of maneuverability, but they can't make a hairpin turn. There's just no way. The size and the breadth of their wings and stuff won't let them do that. The other thing is they have to keep moving. So they can't stop in midair for very long. They can break their turn up, like when they're flying and it's their turn, they can break that turn up, but they have to move at least 20 feet. And that's a rule that I threw in there because I think, well, if they're stationary for very long, they're going to lose altitude. So the mechanic that I had made for that was essentially if they stop, that's fine, and then if they have to continue the rest of their movement. However, if they stop, let's say they move 10 feet and then another 10 feet, that's 20 feet, that's the minimum. So whatever their movement rate is, let's see what that is for flight. I think it's 40. Yeah, so they get a 40 feet movement rate. So if they don't move at least half of their movement rate for one reason or another, they're going to lose 20 feet of altitude. So that's the rule I made, is if there is altitude to be had. So there could be situations tactically where these guys are flying low and then they can't finish their flight path. So they might have to hit the ground. So then you'd start getting into falling damage, which is a 1d6. So that is something to consider. So tactically, if you get them grouped together and they don't have room to move around, that may be a thing. You can get them to collide, or you can get them to lose altitude. The other thing I thought about was hold person. Well, that spell works on humanoids, and technically they're a monstrosity, so that may not work. However, your DM may change their mind and say, yeah, that'll work on them, since they do have a human-like quality. But it's not really made for monstrosities, but your DM could rule that. So hold person would be pretty deadly. So you could technically cast that on them and make them plummet to their death. The other thing I thought about was a paralytic poison. So if you had a blowgun or maybe a javelin or something like that with a paralytic, if you can paralyze them, they don't make their saving throw, that could be devastating too. And then the last thing I thought of was a net. So it would be hard to throw a net at them, but if you were above them somehow or on the level with them, it would be fairly easy to throw a net on them, and that would make them kind of slower, and they'd probably have to be on the ground, and they only move half their movement rate on the ground. So they're walking around at 20 feet. So that might be another tactic that you can use for these creatures to battle them. So thinking about all these elements, before you design the encounter, before you even set up this thing, would be ideal, and give you the forethought of, okay, what if the players do this, or what if this creature does that? These are the sort of things why I did the research, because a lot of times I'll run an encounter and I don't even know half of what that creature can do. And quite often I waste its abilities and its special attacks, and then it just becomes like a basic generic stat block with hardly any features, maybe one that stands out. Probably the Alluring Song is about the only thing that really stands out with this type of creature, other than its club and its claw attacks. And then the fact that it can dive bomb, I think that should be another trait. So that's why I made different Harpies. So one of them, this Ambusher, is more like, like a martial type. There is a Guardian type that kind of stays around the nest, and they kind of stay in the area. They're like guards. Then there's the Shamanic type, which is like a spellcaster. And then there's the young. There's the common ones, and then there's a scout type one, and that's kind of what this Ambusher is like, the scout. So they're different variations, and all it would really do is change a couple stats around a little bit. Like the shaman would probably have a 12 or a 13 wisdom instead of a 10. But it'd probably have less strength, so maybe a 10 strength instead of 12. Little things like that, just kind of offset it. And then on top of that, some of their traits might be a little different. But all in all, they still all get the Alluring Song. They get the claw. But the warriors would probably get a javelin or a spear instead of a club. And that would be the only difference really between and then of course hit points and your CR level. So that's sort of things that you could do to kind of make these more more custom and a little bit more interesting to play. And you can kind of make them a little bit more tribal or clan-like, so they don't have just a generic like 2 harpies in a cave and you fight them. I mean, that's fine. But if you want more lore and more information, and then on top of that, you might even think about what kind of loot would they have. Like would they have like, in a pile of bones, like small and large, or small and medium bones, like fish bones, maybe a couple humanoids, a couple rodents, and then inside there might be a key to a chest, there might be a few coins, could be an old scroll case that's beat up that has a map in it. I mean, there's all kinds of little cool trinkets that they'd probably have in their lore, in the nest for the lore. And then they might have stuff that doesn't really have value, but it may look cool, like some ornamental stuff or maybe a little bit of jewelry. But that's just stuff that you can kind of sort out before you throw this at your players. And I think it'd only take you probably about maybe an hour if you had all the information at your fingertips. You calculate putting in a map if you don't already have one and all that. You're looking at probably an hour and a half. And it just depends on how familiar you are with the content, what you have access to, that sort of thing. So those are just considerations. So the Harpy is one of the cooler creatures that I like for this particular rule set, and any other really. A Harpy is a really cool legendary, or at least a really cool creature. So I'm going to show you some artwork that I had kind of came up with. I generated this with AI. So fair warning, if you don't like AI, you can leave. So I'm going to download all of this stuff. So this is the stuff that I made, and I uploaded it to Discord so I'd have a place to put it. But essentially, this is basically all these Harpies are just things that I had put together earlier this week for the show. So I just kind of made like a poster, and then I just kind of went all out. I did certain things so that I can show kind of like what I was working on. So let's see, what do I have here? All right, so I'm going to save some of this work that I have in here. And there is a Harpy Cove that I was basically looking at. And see, here's a token that I made for this. So there's a custom flat pog that I made for this. And then there was these individual pictures, what I thought would make really cool looking artwork to put into your adventure. If you're going to like run an adventure that features a Harpy, you can do stuff like this. So I always thought that, Harpies are pretty cool looking. They definitely they have a place in my heart. They're really cool. So I think they're one of my favorite monsters as far as the game goes. So this is like one of the Harpy doing its alluring song, trying to trick the adventurers to coming to it, you know, making a stand. This is a Harpy getting ready to have a snack. He found a baby deer or something like that, or some kind of four-legged creature. And then here's one that kind of looks pretty menacing, actually. And then this one's pretty nice. So a little trick that I learned recently is that Discord uses WebM and WebP. So when you save or upload your stuff to here, it automatically converts it to WebP. So when you download it, you don't have to convert it. So if it's already the correct size, you don't have to worry about that, which is really cool. That's really helpful. So I use it to kind of stage up my pictures so that I don't have to go back later and fix it. So that's kind of cool. But essentially, that's basically it. So I'm going to go and add those to the campaign. So I'm going to go to Images, get that kind of ready to go, and then I'm going to go into the assets where these are actually going to go. So this is why I'm kind of showing this so you guys can see this part of it, because like I said, a lot of times the stuff's already done. You don't get to see this part. So I wanted to make sure that this is something that you guys get a chance to look at. All right, so for the assets, I'm going to make sure I'm clicking on Images. Okay, so that's the important part. I don't have a